when we love someone who is struggling with mental illness or addiction, we are grieving not just who they used to be and the relationship that we had with them, but we're also grieving the hopes and dreams that we had for their future.
Mm.
It's referred to as ambiguous grief, and it's not really understood by those around us. I mean, after all, they aren't dead, so how can you be grieving them?
Hello, and welcome to the Gift of Need podcast. I'm Jude Trang, author and observer of human need in society. And this podcast seeks to address the overlooked power of human need and how it shapes our behavior, our relationships, and society. And I hope to just whet your appetite and get you thinking about how your needs and how our needs are not burdens, but opportunities and gifts. And I do that with amazing guests with a variety of backgrounds and professions, like my guest today. Pattie Vargas is with me today from California, and we're going to be talking about addiction and all the trauma surrounding it and why we need to reckon with family trauma. Hi, Pattie.
Hi, Jude. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, thank you. Pattie holds degrees in organizational and business management, and as a former PMP certified project manager, she led large enterprise-wide initiatives. She's a certified and recognized leader in behavioral, organizational, and personal change, and she's built a practice focused on coaching individuals and teams through the twists and turns of change, along with frequently speaking at conferences. But in 2017, her world changed, as did the focus of her many talents. Pattie is an author, activist, and speaker now on the topics of substance use, recovery, and family trauma and grief. So, Pattie, would you start by telling us a little bit about your personal life?
Oh, where to begin? I started dating my kid's dad when I was only 15 years old, and I married him a year out of high school. At one point, we were doing faith-based outreach, working with folks who were using heroin and other illicit substances, and working within the family substances, family systems that are affected by that use. And after some upheaval in the organization that we were working with, we returned to secular work and focused on raising our kids, Stephen, Joel, and Rebecca. And in 1995, after almost 23 years of marriage, he decided he had never really had a chance to live. He no longer wanted to be tied down. And by the way, had finally met the woman of his dreams. And yeah, even though I wasn't happy in the marriage either, he had resisted all of my attempts to get therapy or other kinds of help, telling me I was overreacting, I was being dramatic. And I resigned myself to just waiting things out until the kids were grown. But he kind of took that decision out of my hands. And the kids were blindsided as we had kept all of our issues more or less on the down low. And knowing I was going to need some help, I packed them up and we moved closer to my job and family members, and we started all over without him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to be talking about trauma as it relates to loss, any kind of loss, and addiction. But first, let's talk a bit about the losses, the trauma, and the resilience gained that made up the first part of your book, Secrets, Scars, and Heart-Shaped Jars. In the introduction you wrote, the first part of this book was released in April 2018 under the title, The Resilience Factor is Your Superpower. The intent was to tell a victorious story of how, in the midst of a long-term marriage, your world was suddenly upended. And you say, I had to find my way forward in an unwanted new normal. Even the title was meant to inspire images of overcoming, strength, growth, and girl power. So, Pattie, I would imagine that bringing this book to publication must have brought a sense of accomplishment for you after all the things that you had gone through and learned.
It did. Um, when I would speak of the disruption in my life, the story really resonated with other women who had faced something similar and were looking for guidance or next steps or maybe just some validation in knowing that they weren't alone. And
Mm.
that was important to me because I had felt very much alone and even ostracized in some circles.
Mm.
I had women reach out to me from all over who had read the book and they felt seen, maybe for the first time since it had happened to them.
Mm. Boy, that's a story that I think is very familiar. So, but as preparations were being made for the release and all the fanfare around that and speaking engagements and book signings, something happened that changed your world forever, and it also changed the book. In the second part of the book, now retitled Secret Scars and Heart-Shaped Jars, you wrote, I want the story of what we were going through with family addiction to be part of this story too. The second half of the book is our experiences and what we learned along the way. It's raw and vulnerable. I want people to understand that addiction is an equal opportunity killer and not relegated to the poor, uneducated, or marginalized. So, Pattie, what was it like rewriting an upbeat, motivational book and adding the deep grief and now the new reality of a not so inspiring life and all your struggles?
When the original book was released, I felt like a fraud. I had not mentioned what we were going through, that 2 out of my 3 kids were using meth and heroin, and the impact that it was having on all of us, because I felt like it would be violating them in some way.
Mm.
And as so many people who are experiencing substance use in their families, I was probably a little ashamed too. It didn't fit into the narrative of overcoming and superpower. So rewriting the book felt more authentic, but also really hard. I had to think about what to share, how much was too much, what would people think of my kids, how would my sober son feel? There were times I wrote, rewrote, ripped out, put back in, walked away for a bit. I mean, Joel was gone, and it was important to me that people not blame him for all that we were going through. And Becca had not yet entered recovery. So likewise, I didn't want people piling on or providing unsolicited advice about how to deal with her
Right.
either.
So, as Pattie and I both learned, it does not take the death of a loved one for a family to experience trauma. Especially somebody in addiction. It happens simply by having an addicted person in the family. This has been well known for families of alcoholics since the 1930s and the beginning of AA. There's like this vortex that the addicted person sucks all the energy into from the family and the community. Pattie, you wrote, in many families, addiction does not arrive as a headline event. It seeps in quietly, wrapping itself around daily life until shame and stigma become the only constants. From the first whispered suspicion to the final unbearable loss, those two forces follow families everywhere. Why don't you start by telling us about how your family entered the world of drug addiction, how it seeped in?
This is such a long story, you know, when you
Well,
think about how do I boil this down? As far as we know, Joel started experimenting with drugs as early as 14 or 15. His dad left when Joel was 15, and he was quite angry. He was angry at his dad. He was angry with me for uprooting his life. He was just angry in general. And you would think that my early experiences of working with drug users, I would recognize the signs, but I didn't. Somehow I was able to convince myself that it would never turn into anything serious.
did he, do you know, did he start with opiate pills like oxys and stuff?
Mhm. Uh, No, he did not. It
Mm,
started with marijuana, and
mm,
then it gradually moved on into to other drugs, progressed into to other drugs.
mm. Was Joel fairly normal kid with good friends at school, and did he have to seek out drugs, or was his introduction to them part of what was happening in his world at school and work? I mean, you wouldn't think that a middle class kid's going to all of a sudden one day say, "I think I'm going to try some drugs and go down to the Tenderloin or the poor part of town."
Yeah.
Was it around
So
in his
Joel,
school?
oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. As much as people didn't want to admit that it was very prevalent. Um, but Joel was super, super smart, and he was very popular. He had no trouble making friends ever from the time he was small. He was quite charming. Um, again, from the time he was little, he was funny and he was charismatic and he was just very, very charming. But relocating him to a new school was really hard on him, and it led to academic issues for the first time in his life, and as well as trouble finding a really good friend group.
Mm,
He always struggled with impulse control, and after he entered high school, we suspected ADHD, but the uh, diagnosis pendulum, if you will, had kind of swung from every kid needs ADD meds to now nobody needs them. And we had doctors that would minimize our concerns and minimize the signs. So it was really hard while he was still a minor under our roof to really get him much help in that area. But he told me one time that when he smoked marijuana, it turned down the noise in his
mm,
head.
mhm.
And he described the first time he smoked meth as feeling like he had found nirvana. Now, how do you
Mm,
tell somebody, don't do that then? Don't use those drugs when they're telling you I feel normal for the first time in my
yeah.
life, you know?
It's funny, your story sounds a lot like our son. I mean, Joel does, very intelligent, very winsome, had lots of friends always, but he had a traumatic experience of us, something again, one of those regrets. You look back and go, why did we do that? Taking him out of his little group of kids at a private school as he entered junior high and putting him into a public school with 800 kids he didn't know. And
Yeah.
who did he latch on to but a group of the other kids that were kind of misfits and stuff? And the kid whose dad had been a white collar drug dealer, and then the story goes downhill from there. But that was at 13. By 14 he was using oxys, and by 15 he was severely addicted and had switched over to black tar heroin because it was so much cheaper than buying oxys. One oxy at that time was $40, and you could get a hit of black tar heroin for less than $5. So
Right. Yeah.
um, so after you recognized that he was addicted to dangerous drugs, what happened? I mean, was there a lot? You said around 14 or 15. When did you go, okay, something's wrong? And was that still in high school or was it after?
Oh my God. It was way too long. I mean, honestly, again, kind of knowing what I had known before, um, but I also like to say, that we don't know what we don't know too,
Right.
and so much of this is hindsight is 2020, right? But Joel went from marijuana to pills and party drugs, and he was dealing them, and he was running around with a group of kids who were doing the same.
Mhm.
One time while he was hallucinating on MDMA, he showed up at his brother's apartment and he was terrified that he was being chased by somebody. And after that, we staged our first little mini intervention with him. Didn't know we were doing. And he agreed to stop doing drugs, but he didn't. And we didn't know what else to do. I suggested rehab, which I had absolutely no experience with,
Mm.
but he was adamant that he didn't need that. And Becca was still in high school, my youngest, and we would cry together about the things that he was doing and just feeling so helpless, which made her foray into experimentation even that much more painful.
Oh.
Uh, Somewhere along the way, he moved on to smoking heroin and meth, and it was probably his first arrest that helped us understand this was just not going to go away on its own, that he wasn't going to outgrow it. And it sounds ludicrous now, and in hindsight, it was, but it's easy to convince yourself that your kid is different, that your family is different. Somehow we'll be able to beat this, and we'll just love him out of all of this.
Mm.
Um, but that arrest led to another and another and another, with stints in jail that led to one kind of rehab or another. And sometimes he would actually give it a go. Uh, but there are so many systemic barriers in the way of sustained recovery,
Mhm.
especially following a jail stay, that recurrence is almost a given.
How old was he for the first arrest?
I think he was 26.
Oh, okay, so we're talking he's out of high school. Was he in college working and not functional?
Never went to college. He worked, he almost always had one kind of a job or another. And I mean, one kind of a job or another, because
Mhm.
they would never last, for
Yeah,
very long.
yeah.
Kind of a downhill for him was, we were trying to get him into something that's called California Conservation Corps here. And it's a job training and so forth, and you have to be 25. That's the max age. And so we were trying to get him into that before he turned 26.
Mhm.
And he got accepted into it, showed up to all the trainings high as a kite, flamed out of that. And that was when we sent him to his first true rehab, what we called the gold-plated rehab,
Mhm.
where, we took out a second mortgage on our home, paid $45,000 for 28 days, and, at the end of that 28 days, he was pretty much right back into the game
Yeah.
again.
That was in that era in the teens, the 20 teens and stuff where and I'm surprised at how it's still a prevalent idea that 30, 45, 60 days and you'll get out of rehab after you've second mortgaged your home and you'll be free of this drug addiction. It's just phenomenal. And that's what we thought because that's what we were being told, right, by the
Well,
professionals. Yeah,
the only thing that drives that 28-day stay is what the insurance is willing to pay.
exactly.
That's where that came from.
Right.
It has nothing that there's no basis in scientific,
No,
understanding at all.
no.
And their answer to us at the end of that, when it was clear that he was not fixed, was, "We'll just sign up for another 28 days." Well, okay, we're out of houses to mortgage,
Yeah, right.
So,
So tell us, Patty, how stigma and shame work against recovery efforts and why you came to believe that transparency is key and that, although adversity is humbling, in a life without hardship, our humanity is lacking. We need that. So talk to us a little bit about that.
yeah, I wanted let me go back for just a second because I wanted to kind of tie in Becca's experience to this
Okay.
before I start talking about, some of that stigma. Um, Beck was, her first drug of choice was alcohol, and she was a functional alcoholic for the next 10 years or so. And Joel had never been a drinker, so go figure, he did everything else but alcohol. So we kind of didn't recognize. It sounds like we were just so incredibly oblivious, and that's because we were. um, but she was functional. She had a job, she had an apartment, she took care of herself, and so forth. And um, it wasn't until she ended up in the hospital, uh, literally chained to a bed, having the DTs, that she recognized that she needed help. We had already started to see the signs, and we're asking her to get help, but she finally agreed to go into rehab. So she entered her first rehab for alcohol in 2015.
Mm.
And while she was in co-ed rehab, which I do not recommend ever, she was introduced to heroin by a young man in the facility. Joel would have never introduced her to heroin. I mean, he would have done everything to protect anyone he loved from getting into that. But she eventually ended up on the streets and made her way down to San Diego to be with Joel, and they continued using together. And she was with him when he died, and she was the one to call us and give us that devastating news. But part of why I think we were so oblivious is this whole idea of stigma and shame, and as they say in the rooms, we're only as sick as our secrets. And after I began to speak out about our experience, I found out how many were going through exactly what we had been going through, but like us, they had kept it within their own, four walls. And some folks were extremely judgmental, as I'm sure I was too before I knew. But others were relieved to be able to share their story. Stigma and shame thrive in darkness, and it's only through exposing the myths and assumptions around substance use disorder that we can educate our communities about this disease, and that it is a disease and that it's real and it warrants a healthcare response. And I've found that people fear what they don't understand, and that leads to a lack of empathy to what's happening to the people right around us and in our families. And while I would give anything to have this not be my story, I'm grateful that I've had my eyes opened. And I hope I am a more compassionate and kind person because of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's the insight you never wished you had to learn this way. It's the same story for us. So,
Yeah.
Grieving the Living is an article written several years ago by Dr. Susan Reiter for the Community Alliance for Healthy Minds in San Diego in their newsletter. And I want to read this. I think it's important. For those of us who have a loved one who struggles with mental illness or addiction, we are all too aware of how we can lose the living when that individual is in the throes of deep depression, mania, psychosis, anxiety, disordered eating, or any unmanaged mental illness or addiction. Their behaviors are altered. They are not themselves, or at least not the version of the people that we have grown to know and love. Our relationship with this loved one changes as a result of what we are experiencing separately and together, and we often feel a deep sense of loss. But we must grieve the relationship of the past if we are to create a new one in its place in the future. So that is, and she's speaking about what you do when somebody is still addicted.
Yep.
How do you accept while you've grieved, and how do you move on, right? So, Pattie, please share some of the types of trauma that families go through with someone in active addiction while we're trying to help our loved one become free and stay alive. And what do you counsel people to do to survive grieving the living and that accompanying daily trauma?
Um, that is a really profound quote, because we live in a very grief illiterate society. which is very isolating for the griever. When we love someone who is struggling with mental illness or addiction, we are grieving not just who they used to be and the relationship that we had with them, but we're also grieving the hopes and dreams that we had for their future. It's referred to as ambiguous grief, and it's not really understood by those around us. I mean, after all, they aren't dead, so how can you be grieving them? I remember distinctly having to let go of ever believing Joel would go on to college. He had all these college dreams, and finally he died a month shy of his 36th birthday, and finally coming to a place where it was like, I don't care if he ever does anything, like that. Just if he would just be well, but letting go of those hopes and dreams and what could have been. And in addition, we're experiencing what's called anticipatory grief, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's the inability to sleep through the night. It's being struck with fear every time the phone rings or you see a police officer in your neighborhood, it's for you. And these are very, very real traumas. And it results in a heightened sense of arousal and just an absolute inability to relax. And this is not understood by the people around us, and you're grieving someone who is still alive.
Then there is the all too common loss of our addicted loved one. So Pattie is a certified grief professional now, helping others navigate the frightening journey through addiction, finding hope for recovery, and then comforting those who have lost loved ones due to this disease. What are some of the ways you help families find new meaning in the midst of this kind of a devastating loss?
So the primary thing that grieving families need, and I want to insert here for just a second that families are not limited to moms and dads and siblings or even blood relatives, because some of the folks that come to my grief groups were the family of choice for their lost loved one. That's not unheard of at all when you think of shame and stigma and people being written off by their families. But the primary thing that folks need is to be heard, to feel like they are seen, to have their belief system not challenged, not ridiculed, to not be told they ought to be over it by now, or they just aren't grieving right. They need to be validated in whatever it is that they're feeling, wherever they are. Every once in a while, somebody will say, uh, I'm having all of my relatives over for dinner this Sunday, and everyone just goes, oh, it's like they all understand what that's going to mean to have all your relatives over, but that one is not there.
Yeah.
Or you've got some insensitive member of the family who's going to say something horrible, so there's that collective understanding in our grief circles of what we've been through, and that in those circles you're not going to be told you ought to be over this by now. For God's sake, it's been 3 months, it's been 5 years, it's been 10 days, whatever the case may be. They don't need that. They don't need to be told that they're not doing something right. And we all have lots of ways of educating ourselves about drug policy or substance use. And that's important, but that's not what they need from me when they come into our rooms. They want to be able to tell their story. They want to say their loved one's name over and over and over again. They want to know that they're loved and accepted and they're not going to be forgotten.
Well, aside from Pattie's own practice, she works now with many addiction advocacy organizations that are tirelessly attempting to help us see addiction and recovery as a healthcare issue rather than a criminal justice issue. And if you listen to this podcast, you know I've had many people on and will continue to have advocates for removing addiction out of the criminal justice area into a healthcare area, especially in the way we treat people who are addicted. So, Pattie, why do you feel that it's important to help see changes implemented in the area of addiction recovery?
So both Joel and Becca were very abused at the hands of the criminal justice system as well as the healthcare system from time to time. We saw a lot of misinformation, a lot of just cruel treatment, and every once in a while, some kind, things as well. I don't want to just broad brush it there, but they definitely we saw some of the worst of that whole area, of that whole mindset, I guess. And so, uh, what I like to say is that the addiction is a community disease. And if it's a community disease, then it requires a community response. And support should be right here in our neighborhoods. And we've got to stop with having these piecemeal, inconsistent, punitive approaches to recovery. We cannot arrest our way out of this.
Mm-mm.
And the world needs to understand that recovery is very possible. And therefore, it's worth investing in. What we've done has not worked for decades and decades and decades. And why we keep doing the same thing, thinking it's going to yield a different response, is just ludicrous to me. But it's worth understanding, I think, why our loved ones resist recovery. Why do they resist it? And are they resisting it because we are prescribing something for them that doesn't meet their need, but we think it does, or it's convenient, or it fits in some box, or whatever the case may be? When we start listening to them, and what would help you, and what would recovery look like for you, and what would be meaningful for you, we might stand a chance at addressing this. The idea of treating substance use or mental health with punitive criminal justice approaches is just so short-sighted, and it doesn't ever lead to anything, any kind of lasting recovery. I know there are those who say going to jail saved my life, and maybe it did because it was an interruption and it pulled you out of your environment and it saved you. And if so, thank God. I'm glad that it did. But I don't believe that should be the only response, or that should not be the only solution. And uh, my daughter had been in her recovery for more than 4 years, uh, doing the work, working in the recovery field, living on her own, paying her bills, supporting other people. When she had to come back to California to answer a charge that was 5 years old, 6 years old. And rather than looking at, wow, look what she's done, she's turned it around, she's a productive member of society, she's doing good things, she's paying taxes. Nope, they threw her into jail for 6 months.
No.
Threw her into jail for 6 months. Totally unnecessary. And that is not restorative. That is punitive.
Exactly.
Period. Period.
You know, in California, I mean, I hear that drug courts are making headway in the states. I've got a friend in Tucson that overseas drug courts, and where somebody comes in and they've been arrested, because they were stealing to get money for their habit, or they were found dealing more than what was for personal use because they need money to buy their own drugs. And then if they can choose to go into a recovery type program and have oversight and stuff, do you have any experience with that, and what do you think of that? I mean,
Yeah,
it's not getting rid of the criminal aspect to addiction, but it's kind of seems to me a step in the right direction.
yeah, it's we refer to those as diversionary tactics. I have a very good friend who is over what we call collaborative courts here in our county, and drug court is one of those collaborative courts. Um, but in California, everything is county based. So what is done in one county is not necessarily done in another county. And the county where Becca was forced to come back and do her 6-month sentence, which was negotiated down, 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 down from probably a 5-year term
My
down
gosh.
to 3 years, down to, finally 6 months, because we're going to get our pound of flesh out of you one way or another, was in Placer County, where the DA had literally said, I am going to make my name on drug arrests and drug sentences.
Wow.
So make it make sense, right? So I'm all for diversionary, whatever the case may be. If there is a reasonable way of dealing with something, let's do that instead. Let's do that.
Right. Um, do you want to share anything about Becca's, what actually helped her get her sobriety?
Yeah, it's again, that's a really long story. But we had heard about a trial that was happening in Kentucky using an experimental device called the NET device. You can learn more about it at netrecovery.net. And she had been to, she says 9 rehabs. So there were some she went to that I didn't even know about, but she had been to rehab 9 times. And when I heard about this device, I asked her if this was ever available, would you do it? And she said, yes, in a heartbeat, thinking full well I was never going to find it. And then I found it. And they were starting this trial in Kentucky. And I called her and I said, Beck, I found it. Will you go? And at the time I called her, she was in a trap house in Oakland, California. She had been robbed the night before. She had literally nothing to her name. She was sick as a dog. And she looked around herself and said, what the hell do I have to lose? And so she said, yes, I was in the car, like within minutes, driving to where she was. My husband was online making airfare reservations to Kentucky, brought her home. We were on a plane the next morning. We had her in the facility that night. They checked her in. She used the device that night. And she was in full-blown withdrawal when we brought her there. I mean, she was in full-blown knee shaking, sweating, running nose, the whole 9 yards. She had used all the way across the United States. And she started calming down. She said that like within an hour, stomach eased up, knee stopped shaking. Nose wasn't running. She didn't want to kill everybody around her anymore. And she wore the device for 5 days, I believe. She stayed and did therapeutic rehab there for 60 days. Then she moved into, because getting sober is the easy part. I mean, detoxing is the easy part. It's the mental, the emotional detachment from substances, the understanding what made you do this to begin with? What led you to this to begin with? That's the hard work. So she stayed there and did therapy for 60 days, then moved into sober living, and then started working with the net device folks and using, helping people use the device. She began speaking all across Kentucky, getting funding for different outreaches there, using opioid dollars and so forth in Kentucky. And she's still working for them today.
Wow, what a wonderful story, and I think it's important to let people know, young people, and probably everyone who are addicted to these potent drugs do not want to be addicted. Our son did not want to be addicted. He cried out to us and said, I want to get clean. The facts are, and if I remember this, I forget the man's name. He's a professor back in Harvard, I think. John, this was from 10 years ago. It takes an average of 8 to 9 recovery attempts and 5 to 8 years to get clean and sober from opioids. And that's not at all what people realize. People, like you said, we've said, it's like people think you're going to do this for 45 or 60 days and you're going to be clean unless there's something remarkable. And that's why, of course, medicated assisted treatment and harm reduction efforts are so important. And to just think that what makes people think that putting somebody in jail for 6 months is going to do something. I mean, it's totally illogical. So, Pattie, as we bring the conversation to a close, is there anything else you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I would say just this. No one needs to suffer alone. There's so many of us who have walked this path. And whether you are just beginning to navigate life with a loved one who is using substances, or you have experienced the ultimate loss, please reach out for help. You don't have to do this alone. You just don't have to carry this alone.
Well, thank you, Pattie, for being here and talking about how the needs we all have, when the things we never planned on happening in our lives can become opportunities and gifts as we're transparent and we allow others to help meet our needs with their special gifts. Then we, in turn, like you, can take what we have gained, through our needs to meet the needs of others. And in this way, the needs of individuals, families, communities can be met, which in turn brings joy and fulfillment to us all. So thank you for your work and for being on today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jude. I'm so grateful that our paths have crossed.
Yes. Folks, you can purchase Pattie's book wherever books are sold and check out her website for articles and resources. It's theresilientjourney.net, or you can find her on Facebook at The Resilient Journey or on YouTube at Family Grief, and those links will be in the show notes. So the great music you are hearing now was written and performed by Gabe Kubanda at Kubanda Music. I love Gabe's music. It's so fun and interesting, good, thoughtful songs. You can find him on any streaming service. The engineer is Ray Engineering of 3rd Street Productions in Tucson, Arizona. Please consider following and sharing this podcast and subscribing to the new Gift of Need YouTube channel and my free Substack website. Again, the links will be in the show notes. Send us comments, rate, and review. That helps keep programs and podcasts and articles like this coming your way. So thank you. Bye.